Hi guys, Olive here today to tell you what I read in May 2022. As usual, we'll start off by discussing fiction, and the classic book that I read in May was The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, one half of this edition. This is a classic work of science fiction all about a Victorian-era time traveler who uses a self-created time machine to propel himself forward 800,000 years in time, and when he gets there, he discovers that the Earth looks very different, and the human race has split off into two different species. As I said in my May TBR video, I am not a science fiction reader, so I had no idea what I was going to end up thinking about this. And surprisingly enough, I actually really enjoyed it. It's not a new favorite by any means, but I had a good time reading it, and I really loved how inventive it was, especially for the time period in which it was written. From what I was reading, it seems like H.G. Wells actually coined the term time machine in this book. It's now in our lexicon because of this book, and I find that to be super cool. I also really liked the political and economic themes within this story. There is just a lot going on within this story, which actually made me all the more surprised to see that the writers of the 90s PBS Kids TV show Wishbone decided to base an episode on the story of the time machine. They made some very bold, very ambitious choices for that show, especially seeing as it was a kids' show. But I actually looked at that episode in my latest episode of What's the Story Wishbone, my series in which I break down those Wishbone episodes. I'll link that video for you in the description box below and up in the cards in case you're in the mood to watch a time-traveling Jack Russell Terrier. But then on to all the other fiction books I read during May. Toward my goal of reading through all of Meg Wollitzer's backlist, in May I read her fourth novel, which is titled Friends for Life. This book is about three young women in their late 20s. They've known each other since grade school, and they've remained friends ever since. Two of them actually don't really like each other that much, but as a group, they still have a pretty solid friendship. They still keep up with each other's lives, and they get together on a regular basis. Each of the three of these women is going through her own journey throughout the course of this very short book. They each have their own career that they're trying to navigate. They have romantic relationships that come in and out of their lives. And through the course of this book, the friendship that they share as a group is definitely tested. And in that way, it actually reminded me a little bit of what Meg Wolitzer would go on to do in The Interestings, because that is about a friend group who meet very young, and then you see how their friendships are tested as they get older. Can it survive the transition from childhood to adulthood, and then all the different phases of life we go through as adults? I found the banter between these three women to be very quick, very witty, and honestly very funny. Like, I think it holds up. I think it's still funny. And that was so nice for me to just be able to laugh and enjoy reading a Wolitzer novel after the horrible experience I had last month with the Wolitzer novel I read. I read This Is Your Life, which was her third novel, and that's literally about a stand-up comic, and yet it was one of the least funny things I have ever read. So this was a welcome change. However, I will say that parts of this have aged horribly. It was written in the early 90s, so it hasn't aged that great. And I mean that both internally and externally, because of the content, like I just said, but also because of this physical object. I very much imagine that whoever owned this used copy last was just chain smoking Marby Lights the entire time she was reading it, because this just reeks. I will be very happy to get this out of my life once I am done with this project. But the reading experience itself, never minding the smell, was not that bad. It's not the worst way I've ever spent an afternoon. It just wasn't all that memorable. Then I read two romance books in May, and I thought I would talk about them as a pair because they're both bookish. And the first one is called Meet Me in the Margins by Melissa Ferguson. The second one is Book Lovers by Emily Henry. Meet Me in the Margins is about a woman named Savannah who works as an editor in a very highbrow publishing house. But in her free time, she's writing a romance book that her bosses probably would not approve of. She's working on edits to her manuscript in the office one day. She's very pressed for time, and she hides that manuscript in a very secret place within the office so that no one sees it. But when she returns to the manuscript, she finds that someone has been making edits to it. And they're actually helpful edits that she would enjoy continuing to receive. So she and this mystery person continue to go back and forth with these edits. They bond within the margins of her manuscript. And then at the exact same time, a new guy has also entered Savannah's life. This one was interesting. I'd say in order to enjoy this one, there are some serious backbends that you need to do as a reader when it comes to the suspension of disbelief. And admittedly, I'm not the best at that. One of the reasons why I am not as big of a sci-fi fantasy reader, I like things to feel realistic, at least to a degree. I can suspend my disbelief a little bit, but when you're asking me to do a lot of it, that's where I start to stub my toe and have some problems. I mean, there are some very obvious things going on within this book that our main character has to willingly make herself blind to in order to not see what us as readers are seeing throughout this entire book. And that's not even mentioning the fact that there is a whole major storyline within this book about how Savannah's younger sister stole Savannah's long-term boyfriend and is now engaged to him. The whole family's okay with it. They encourage Savannah to just be okay with it. And also, Savannah lives with her sister and this guy. It is all so completely ridiculous. So category is reaching romance. I gave this one 3 stars. It's probably only worth your time as a library read or if you find it on sale on Kindle or something. But the other book within this pair, Book Lovers, I absolutely adored. This book follows 2 publishing industry professionals. Nora is an agent and Charlie is an editor. Right at the beginning of the book, we see them have a very awkward, very spiky business lunch. But then years later, we see them run into each other in a small town in North Carolina because reasons. And at that point, sparks fly. I loved basically everything about this. I loved the connection between Nora and Charlie, which they clearly feel on a number of different levels. It's not just physical attraction. They have an intellectual connection, which is my favorite kind of a connection between characters. I'm an egghead. No surprises there. So I loved that, but I also really liked that there were legitimate obstacles to their relationship. There were legitimate things standing in their way of being together versus arbitrary things like I have seen time and time again in romance books. But more than anything, I loved how funny this book was. It was absolutely hilarious. There were so many moments I actually had to put the book down because I was laughing so hard, and also because I really wanted to read passages aloud to my husband, who didn't care very much, admittedly, but I was really excited, so I needed to tell him. But also plot-wise, there is a choice that Nora makes toward the end of the book. I obviously won't say what it is to avoid spoilers, but if you read the book, you probably will know what I'm talking about. There's a choice she makes toward the end of the book, and it's a choice she makes for herself, and she makes it unapologetically, and I loved that. I think that sends such a good message, and I loved that it was included in this book. I liked that we got the ending that we did, but I loved that she made that choice first. It's wonderful. I think this book deserves all the hype that it's getting right now. It's a great book, and it has been a very long time since I have truly loved a romance book. So this was a breath of fresh air. But crashing back down to earth here, I had one DNF during the month of May, and I am extremely sad to report that that was Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. I had some seriously high hopes for this one. It seemed to have so much in common with one of my favorite nonfiction books, The Soul of an Octopus by Cy Montgomery. And yet, I just couldn't get into this one. This book is being advertised as the story of a janitor at an aquarium who bonds with a giant Pacific octopus and is also trying to figure out what happened to her son, who went missing, I think, years prior. What that blurb does not mention is the fact that this story takes forever to get started. If it ever gets started, I don't know. I didn't finish it. It also does not mention at all a major character in this story named Cameron, who just so happens to be a 30-something-year-old do-nothing who keeps losing jobs and making me lose my patience. Take my opinion with a grain of salt if you want, because a lot of people on Goodreads are gushing about this one. They're calling it heartwarming. I saw reports of people saying that they hugged the book once they were done. That's a lot of love to have for a book. I'm very envious. I wish I felt that way, but I just didn't. And if I'm reading something for fun, meaning no one's commissioned a review from me, I'm not going to be paid to write about the book, then I'm not going to waste my time on it if I don't find the first quarter of the book to be compelling. And I definitely didn't in this case. But speaking of written reviews, I am very happy to say that I had 2 written reviews appear during the month of May, and I'm also very happy to report that I loved both of the books. First, I reviewed Trust by Hernan Diaz for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. This is a very complex, very cerebral novel. It's split into 4 parts, and it dissects the myths and realities of this fictional 1920s power couple within the financial world. It's kind of like a jazz-age New York version of The Big Short by Michael Lewis, with a sprinkling of The Wife by Meg Wolitzer. It's an experience, we'll just say that. It is a very complicated book, very challenging to describe. I worked really hard to break down what you can expect from this book and why I loved it so much in my review, which I will link for you in the description box below. But my other review actually appeared in the Christian Science Monitor. I wrote about a nonfiction book called The Fast Ride by Jack Gilden. In this book, the author looks at a spectacular racehorse named Spectacular Bid, and he won the first 2 American Triple Crown races in 1979. He won the Kentucky Derby, he won the Preakness, but he lost the Belmont Stakes when everyone assumed he would win. He was the favorite to take home the Triple Crown. And everyone at the time blamed the very inexperienced jockey for this loss. But it turns out there was a whole lot more going on behind the scenes, and that's the story the author aims to tell in this book, which is simultaneously very much a story of Baltimore, Maryland. This book is just dynamite. I absolutely loved it. I loved the writing. If you'd like to hear more about it, my review will be linked in the description box below. But now let's talk about the nonfiction books I read during the month of May, starting with a science book called The Last Days of the Dinosaurs by Riley Black. And this book looks at not just the impact of the asteroid, but what life would have been like for the dinosaurs ahead of that impact, what the actual day of the impact would have been like, which was terrifying to read about, by the way, but then also what would have happened in the days, years, centuries following the impact. How did we get from the die-off of the dinosaurs to the world we see today? How did mammals take over, basically? In this book, the author bounces back and forth between putting us in the figurative shoes of the dinosaurs, giving us a first-hand account of what life very well may have been like for them, and then discussing the science, what is currently known. And I found that approach to be pretty effective. I definitely found it to be very cinematic, and that's helped along by the fact that this author has a ton of passion for this subject matter, and I love to see that. So I think if you're interested in dinosaurs, this is a new release you'll likely want to pick up. The Last Days of the Dinosaurs I really liked, but these last 2 nonfiction books I'm going to talk about I loved. These were both 5-star reads for me. They were just so good. I mentioned during my May TBR that I was craving some wisdom during the month of May. And my God, did both of these deliver. The first one was Tiny Beautiful Things by Cheryl Strayed. And this is a collection of columns that she wrote for the Dear Sugar advice column that appeared for a period of time on The Rumpus. These are her responses to reader questions. They would write in and ask her about their problems, ask her for advice, and these are her responses. The questions she was asked kind of run the gamut. They range from things like issues people were having with parents or other family members or friends or romantic partners, or other bigger life issues like trauma or feeling stuck. And Cheryl Strayed as Sugar always replies with a mixture of her own life stories that somehow tie into the advice that she's about to give, followed by that advice itself. And her replies are always so heartfelt and raw. I can't say much more about this book beyond that I absolutely loved it. I don't even have words for how much this book affected me. And it's kind of my job to come up with words about books. So that might communicate how deeply this book affected me. I know I need to buy my own copy of it because I want to reread it over and over and over again and highlight passages and carry it with me everywhere. And I don't have my own copy right now. So I will be doing that here very shortly. I was not at all prepared for how much this was going to affect me, but it was exactly what I needed. And then I also read actor and singer Billy Porter's memoir called Unprotected. And in this memoir, he discusses his upbringing here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, during which he faced a lot of abuse, but also during which he discovered his talent and love for the performing arts. But in the book, he demonstrates how hard he had to fight in order to make it in the entertainment industry, and how hard he continues to fight against these traumas in his past, these things that still affect him, that keep him from being able to feel joy in the way that he wants to feel it, and also keep him from being able to accept love from his husband. This book could be heartbreaking, but then again, it was also one of the most empowering things I have ever read. It was so well written. It felt like him. You could feel him radiating off of the page. It feels like he had been preparing to write this for a very long time, and I am so glad he did. I am also so glad that I got to read this with Denise from La Rosa Reads. We read this together ahead of the very first Greater Pittsburgh Book Festival, which was held here in Pittsburgh in mid-May, and Billy Porter spoke at that festival. I got to sit next to Denise as we got to hear him speak, and he was also saying hi to audience members who he knew from childhood because the festival was held in the neighborhood literally in which he used to live. It was just such a cool experience. Denise actually made a whole video about the festival, about her experience with it. She also included some footage from the festival. I'll link that for you if you're interested in watching that. I also made a very short reel over on Instagram, so you can go check that out too if you want. It was an amazing day, and reading this incredible book with Denise ahead of that just made it all the better. So overall, I think it was a pretty great reading month. I did read some books I didn't like quite as much, and I did have that one DNF, but then I had all of those 5-star reads. So I have nothing to complain about. I am very happy with how May went. All of the books I mentioned in today's video, as well as any other links I may have promised you, will be linked in the description box below for your clicking convenience. If you have thoughts on any of those books, or about anything in general, I'd love to hear from you in the comment section below. And if you would like to keep up with what I am reading and writing about right now, you want to know what I'm reading before my next video goes up, you can follow me on a variety of places around the internet, including Goodreads and Instagram, the two places where I'm the most active. The links to everywhere you can find me will be at the bottom of the description box below. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.